The line at the DMV was already out the door when I got there at 7:48 in the morning, 12 minutes before it opened. I want to say I was in a good mood. I wasn't. I'd been at the dealership until 9 the night before, walking a couple to every trim level of a mid-size SUV they weren't going to buy that day, and I could feel that in my lower back and behind my eyes. My coffee had gone cold in the cup holder on the way over. I hadn't eaten anything. I took my number G14 and found a spot near the back wall, between a woman with a stroller and a man who'd already fallen asleep in his chair. The overhead lights in that place are the kind that make everyone look slightly unwell. I checked my phone, realized I'd left it at 14%, and put it away. That's when I noticed him. He was at counter 3. Older man, maybe late 70s, the kind of thin that looks like it came on gradually, and he hadn't quite adjusted to it yet. He had a folder of papers under one arm and a cane he wasn't really leaning on so much as just holding, like he carried it out of habit. The woman behind the counter was young, maybe my age, and she had the expression of someone who had already explained this twice and was preparing to do it a third time. I couldn't hear everything, just pieces. Sir, without the original title. I have the lien release right here. That doesn't. My wife and I have been paying taxes in this county since before you were born. That last part came out harder than he probably meant it to. The woman behind the counter didn't react, which told me she had good training or a thick skin or both. She handed him something, a slip, a form, I don't know, and gestured toward the waiting area. He came and sat 2 chairs down from me. He held the folder in his lap and looked at the floor. He didn't look angry anymore. He just looked tired. I looked back at my phone and tried to remember if I had a charger in my bag. I did not. My job is not glamorous. I sell cars at a Toyota dealership off Route 9, which means I spend most of my days standing in a parking lot in whatever weather is happening, explaining the difference between the LE and XLE packages to people who will ultimately choose based on the color. I've been doing it for 4 years. I'm decent at it. My manager, whose name is Chuck, once told me I had the best closing ratio of anyone under 30 on the floor, which I appreciated, though I also know he tells everyone something like that. I don't have a degree in anything useful. I have a year and a half of community college, a certification I got online, and a very specific knowledge of powertrain warranties. I work Saturdays. I work some Sundays. Last Thanksgiving, my brother texted me a photo of the table already set before I'd even left the lot. I'm not complaining. I chose this. But I want you to understand where I was that morning sitting in those plastic chairs. I was running on 4 hours of sleep and cold coffee and the particular low-grade frustration of someone who has been working very hard and still feels behind. I was not in a generous mood, but I watched this man sit there, and I watched him open the folder and look at the papers inside, and then close it again without doing anything. And I don't know why. I still couldn't tell you exactly why. I leaned over and asked if he needed help figuring out the form. He looked at me. He had pale blue eyes and the kind of face that had been handsome for a long time and still carried traces of it. What's that? The form she gave you. Sometimes they explain it badly. I've been here a few times. He looked down at the slip. It's telling me I need to come back with a document I don't have. What document? Original title. My wife passed in March. The car was in her name. I have the lien release, the death certificate, everything they told me to bring. But apparently what I have isn't what they want. I asked if I could look at the form. He handed it to me. I spent 4 years doing vehicle paperwork. I know what an affidavit of heirship is. I know the difference between a title transfer and a probate transfer. I know which forms the DMV accepts in lieu of an original title when an estate is involved. Because I've helped customers through exactly this situation more times than I can count. Okay, I said. You don't need to come back. He looked at me. You need Form MV349A. It's a surrogate's court certification. If you have the letters testamentary from the estate, it should be in your folder there. You can use that to initiate the title transfer without the original. You tell them you're requesting a replacement title as surviving heir, and they process it differently. He stared at me for a long moment. How do you know that? I sell cars, I said. We do this a lot. He nodded slowly. The woman at the counter probably didn't flag it because you came in presenting the lien release first. She may not have seen the whole picture. I paused. Do you want to go back up? I can come with you and explain it if that would help. He said yes. It took 11 minutes. The same woman behind the counter, to her credit, listened carefully, pulled up the relevant code, confirmed what I'd said, and walked him through the rest of the process herself. She stamped something, gave him a new form, and told him she'd have the replacement title processed within 10 business days. When we sat back down to wait for his number to be called again, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My wife handled all of this. I didn't say anything. She was very good at paperwork," he said. "I never had to think about it." "I'm sorry," I said. "And I meant it the way you mean something when you can't think of anything better, but you mean it anyway." He nodded. His number got called 20 minutes later. I watched him walk to the counter, hand over the folder, and get through the whole transaction without a problem. He tipped his head toward me on his way out. I tipped mine back. Then G114 got called and I went up and dealt with my own registration renewal, which took 4 minutes, and I drove to work. I forgot about it by lunchtime. Not because it didn't matter, just because that's how days go. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon, a woman came onto the lot. She was somewhere in her 60s, well-dressed, and she walked like someone who knew exactly how long she had. She looked at two of our RAV4s without much expression and then asked for me by name. That was not something that happened often. I came out from the floor and introduced myself. She shook my hand. "My father-in-law mentioned you," she said. "He said you helped him at the DMV a few weeks ago." I had a vague recollection. The title transfer. He came home and told my husband the whole story. He said a young woman helped him when no one else would. "The counter rep did all the actual work," I said. "I just helped him figure out which form to ask for." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read. "He said you sat with him." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said, "Is he doing okay?" "Better," she said. "It's been a hard spring." She looked at the RAV4 to her right. "I'm actually in the market. I've been driving a Lexus for 12 years, but it's time for something more practical. My son just had twins." We spent the next 40 minutes walking the lot. She was decisive, which I appreciated. She knew what she wanted and asked specific questions, and when I gave her a straight answer, she moved on. We settled on a Camry XSE, which was not what she came in for, but made more sense for what she described, and she put down a deposit before she left. At the door, she paused. "What's your commission on something like this?" I told her. She nodded. "Good. You earned it twice." Then she left. I stood there for a second. My manager came over. "Who was that?" I told him I wasn't entirely sure. I found out later, not from her, but from the paperwork, that her husband was a district court judge, that her father-in-law, the man with the folder and the cane, had been a long-time city councilman who'd served for nearly 20 years before retiring, that their family had been in this county for 3 generations. I don't know if any of that would have changed how I acted that morning. I'd like to think it wouldn't have. I'd like to think I would have leaned over and offered to help, regardless of who he was or who his family turned out to be. But I also know that's easy to say now. Harder to know for certain when you're tired and hungry and sitting under fluorescent lights at 8 a.m. with a phone about to die. What I can tell you is what I was thinking in that moment, which was almost nothing. I saw someone who looked like he'd been sent back to a starting line he didn't expect to be at an age when you shouldn't have to be navigating starting lines anymore. I knew something that could help. That was the whole equation. The commission on that Camry paid a month of my car insurance and a chunk of what I owed on my credit card. That's not a small thing, and I'm not going to pretend it is. But that's not the part I keep thinking about. The part I keep thinking about is what he said about his wife handling the paperwork, about how she was very good at it, and he never had to think about it. He said it so plainly, without any particular emotion, the way you say something you haven't fully processed yet, like the reality of it was still arriving. I've been to the DMV probably a dozen times in my adult life, and every time it feels like a minor ordeal. Wrong form, wrong line, expired ID, printer out of toner. And every time I've done it alone, which I never thought about as anything other than normal. But he'd done it with someone for 40 years, 50. And then one Tuesday in October, he hadn't. That's the thing about loss. It doesn't announce itself all at once. It shows up in Form MV349A. I still work the same lot. I still work Saturdays. Chuck told me last month I was being considered for a floor manager position, which would mean less time outside and more time doing scheduling spreadsheets, and I'm honestly not sure which I prefer. I've helped a few more people at the DMV since then. Not many. I don't go often. But when I'm there and I see someone looking at a form the way he was looking at it, I ask. Sometimes they want the help and sometimes they don't. Either way is fine. It takes about 2 minutes to say, "Can I take a look at that?" It takes about 30 seconds to figure out if you know something useful. And sometimes you do, and sometimes you just sit there with them while they figure it out themselves. And that turns out to be enough. I'm not sure I knew that before. Not in a way I could have said out loud. I know it now. I've thought about that morning more than I expected to. Not because of the commission, though I won't pretend that didn't matter. And not because of the way it turned out. The judge's wife, the Camry, Chuck's comment afterward. That stuff makes a good ending to tell, but it's not actually the part that stayed with me. What stayed with me was the 11 minutes. That's all it was. I didn't rearrange my day. I didn't sacrifice anything. I looked at a form I happened to know how to read, and I sat next to someone while he figured out the next step. And then I went and renewed my own registration and drove to work. 11 minutes. And yet I keep coming back to it, because I think it's the clearest example I have of something I'm still trying to fully understand, that doing the right thing rarely costs as much as we think it will. There's a version of that morning where I keep my head down, where I tell myself it's not my problem, he'll figure it out, I don't have time. That version exists. I almost lived it. The only thing that stopped me was actually noticing that someone needed something I had. That's the first step. And it sounds obvious, but I think most of us walk past it 100 times a day without realizing it. What I did after that wasn't courage. It was just applied knowledge. 4 years of tighter paperwork and warranty forms and state DMV codes that I'd accumulated without thinking much of it. But here's what I've come to believe. Knowledge is only worth anything in the moment you're willing to use it for someone else. I knew something useful and I shared it. That's the whole transaction. No drama, no calculation, no expectation. I think about this now when I'm on the lot with a customer who's confused, or when a younger colleague asks me something they probably could have Googled. The knowledge I have isn't mine to hoard. It came from 4 years of showing up, making mistakes, getting corrected, paying attention. The least I can do is pass it along when it's needed. And then there's the part about showing up at all. About being the kind of person who walks into a DMV at 7:48 in the morning on 4 hours of sleep and still pays attention to the person 2 chairs over. That's not natural for me. I'm not going to pretend I'm someone who breezes through exhaustion with a smile. I dragged myself there. I sat there annoyed and tired and undercaffeinated. I still looked up. That's the thing nobody talks about when they tell these kinds of stories. It's not that the person who helped was exceptionally warm or selfless or especially gifted. It's that they were tired and showed up anyway, that they were running on empty and still kept their eyes open. That's not a small thing. That's actually the whole thing. I don't know what this old man's name was. I never asked. I know he had pale blue eyes and a cane and a folder full of documents and a wife who used to handle all the paperwork. I know he said she was very good at it in a tone that meant he was still getting used to doing things without her. I think about him when I catch myself complaining about a long shift or a deal that fell through. And I think someone is at a DMB counter right now, holding the wrong forms, missing someone they loved, trying to figure out the next step alone. And maybe the person 2 chairs over knows something that could help. I hope they look up.